too. I hope yesterday and today has been illuminating for all of you, educational, and has expanded your sense of what this is all about. And now we have, it's my very great pleasure, I'm going to introduce the speaker first, so Gabriel, you can chill a wee bit. I'm going to introduce you. This is different because the speaker will be speaking extemporaneously, which is pleasant, and so it'll basically be an open forum, if you like, and you can put questions to the speaker. So the summit has lots of different ways of presenting, and this is another new way, extemporaneous comments. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Gabriel Dy Liacco, PhD. Dr. Gabriel Dy Liacco is on the Commission for the Protection of Minors. So I was previously on this commission. So he'll have insights that very few people have about the inner workings of the Vatican. I'll introduce you first, give you his biographical details. Gabriel was born the youngest of 6 children in 1969 in Lima, Peru, to Filipino parents. He lived in Peru for 2 years, spent the next 7 years in Japan, and then moved to the Philippines, where he lived until young adulthood. Dr. Dy Liacco is an associate professor of the School of Counseling of Divine Mercy, University of Virginia, USA. Is that still the case? And an adjunct professor of the School of Psychology and Counseling of University of Virginia, USA. And was a full member of the faculty of the Department of Pastoral Counseling of Loyola University in Maryland. He serves on the Scientific Advisory Board of the Center for Child Protection of the Pontifical Gregorian University, as well as on the editorial boards of several mental health journals. His own research focuses on the relationships among faith, spiritual experience, spiritual struggles, and the psychological flourishing. He maintains a clinical practice, provides organizational consulting for dioceses and religious orders and education institutions, and conducts workshops, and is the Institute Manager of a newly created Child Safeguarding Institute within Emmanuel Center for Psycho-Spiritual Formation, a Philippine Jesuit ministry serving the needs of the hierarchy and religious of the Church in Asia since 1983. Dr. Dy Liacco holds a PhD in Pastoral Counseling from Loyola University in Maryland and is a licensed professional counselor. Pastoral counseling is a unique discipline that carefully integrates psychotherapy and spirituality. Dr. Dy Liacco began his clinical mental health work in 1999 and is focused on the treatment of individuals, couples, families, and groups for a wide range of issues. These include adult and childhood abuse and trauma, psychiatric diagnoses, personality disorders, addiction, and non-psychiatric problems in learning. Since 2006, he has been working almost exclusively with perpetrators of sex abuse and adults who were childhood victims of that abuse by clergy and other persons in ministry, beginning with the St. Luke Institute, Maryland, USA, and since 2010 in the Philippines. So that's 14 years, 15. In December the 17th, 2014, Pope Francis appointed Dr. Dy Liacco into the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors and Vulnerable Adults, and this appointment was reconfirmed in February 2018. The Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors and Vulnerable Adults is tasked with advising the Holy Father on safeguarding matters within the Church and helping him to promote responsibility for the safeguarding mission among the particular churches. There's more, but that's just a start. So this is a highly capable, a highly educated man. So in relationship to this, this Pontifical Commission, just a little bit of background first about the Commission. So the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors is a Pontifical Commission within the Roman Curia of the Catholic Church, instituted by Pope Francis in 2014 as an advisory agency serving the Pope. Since the 5th of June of 2022, the Commission has been part of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, operating with its officials and according to its norms.
I'll explain later.
All right, yeah. So Cardinal Sean O'Malley, Archbishop Emeritus of Boston, has been its first and current president since 2014. The task Pope Francis had set for this commission, or the aim, is to promote the protection of the dignity of minors and vulnerable adults using the forms and methods which they consider most appropriate, as well as through their cooperation with individuals and groups pursuing these same objectives. The Pope appoints the Commission's presidents. I think now there's 17 members. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so it was expanded, I believe, in 2018. Whatever it is. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome to this microphone the man himself, Dr. Dy Liacco, and you feel free to ask questions of this wonderful man. Dr. Dy Liacco.
Thank you, Murray, and thank you everyone for being here. I just want to say a few things personally, and then also I need to update my bio as well. No, not your fault. I haven't updated it. That's the problem. So I'm very happy that we're here, and you're here. I'm happy, and then like with Kieran, we were having a very interesting and very good discussion during the break. I'm very happy that Bishop Accountability is here, and Susie, sorry. And I'm very happy personally, and speaking for myself, that the longer list has been published. Yeah. Okay. So I started I was appointed in 2014. The commission started meeting as a body in 2015, February 2015. I served 2 terms. My last term ended in 2022. Okay, so I'm no longer a member of the commission. I do not represent the commission in any way right now. I just want to make that very clear. And what I'm going to do is share a little bit about my personal experience, and then my own thoughts and, I hope, educated opinions. You be the judge of that. So my area of expertise, my bio, this Catholic Safeguarding Institute is no longer part of the Jesuit ministry Emmaus Center. Okay, so the Jesuits helped us set it up because we needed a legal structure locally. But as soon as we were able to get certain resources in place, we moved out. Okay? And this was also by the encouragement of the local Jesuits, many of whom are not much older than me. The leadership at the time was maybe just 5 years older than me. I'm 55 right now. At the time I was, 49 or 50. So this is a younger generation. They did not grow up with the same circumstances, conditions, values, or the same education in human dynamics and relationships that their predecessors did. Okay, so we both agreed that we need to be independent, not tied to any church entity. And we should get our funding not from church entities. Okay, so the funding of Catholic Safeguarding Institute comes from Porticus International. It's owned and run by a lay Catholic family. They're very interested in safeguarding and child protection. In fact, they have an exclusive portfolio for it, and some of you may know Jane Leake. I don't know if you've met her.
What's the name?
Jane Leake. Yeah, so she handles the safeguarding portfolio. It's independent of regional operations. Okay, and it's directly under whoever the family member is in charge of the Netherlands. They're based in the Netherlands. And they're not tied, their funding money comes from the operation of their own business. They have a global conglomerate of retail companies, logistics, shipping, all sorts of things. So they don't get money from the church either. So we incorporated in late 2019, and the bulk of the work of this institute has been to give, in the church, training workshops are called formation, and to provide advice to bishops, to religious provincials, to help them deal with their cases, and hopefully they end up doing the right thing. Okay? Try as much as possible to get them to do that. But I say the final decision is theirs, what they do. And if they do the wrong thing, they face the consequences. Some do, some don't. I'll explain what I mean by that later on. So my professional area of expertise has been, since 1999 up to now, in the area of intrapersonal, so individual, interpersonal, group, and organizational dynamics. Particularly in terms of, and Kieran and I were having this discussion. So my area of competence is dealing with human behavior and human motivation at the individual level, interpersonal level, group level, especially when these are disordered. So from my bio, I deal a lot of people with diagnoses. I've dealt with professionally. And that's the lens through which I see things. Now, the commission is a really good idea, I think, in terms of an idea, to put together a group of people who are not inside the, they're not professional people in the church, right? So there are some priests, some religious sisters, but there are also a lot of lay people. And some of them they're not practicing Catholics, some are not Catholic. Okay. So the beginning was, there were challenges, but at the same time, all of us felt like a lot of hope. So Pope Francis, what he's been saying is like a breath of fresh air within this institution that hasn't changed much since, the 4th century, in terms of how it does things internally. Okay. Add to that the various cultures of the world that people come from, who become members of the church and become leadership in the church. And then there's a church subculture, which Pope Francis has called clericalism. So when I was going to Rome, I experienced that very much, and I was shocked. In one gathering, which the commission hosted, and if this is gonna, don't publish this, please. If you do, well, who cares? One gathering which we hosted to get to know people in other departments. And it was weird, because commission members were on one side of the room and all the clerics were on the other side. And they're all talking in Italian. They're from different countries of the world, but Italian is a common language. So a couple of the women, one Australian, Kathleen, I forgot her last name, but Kathleen, it's not coming to me now. Anyway. And then Sheila Hollins, you might have heard the name, or you know her, the Baroness, Minister of Parliament in the UK, very much involved in child protection and disabilities, and rights of disabled people. So they went over, introduced themselves, and they kind of get the cursory, yeah, hi, hello, okay, fine. And then they go back to talking to each other in Italian. So they were standing there, and with their food, it's like, I don't know, 5 or 6 in the evening. And so there's a spread of finger foods, very nice, you know, prosciutto, melon, and all these things, fresh tomatoes, prosecco, and nothing. So they walked back to where the commission members were. So I was thinking, geez, this is ridiculous. It's like a soiree between an all-girls school and an all-boys school, you know, 6th or 7th graders, where the boys are on one side and everyone else is on the other side, you know, girls are on. So I walked over and introduced myself, and they were a little more engaging. Now, my thought at the time was, because I'm a male, okay. But then they again went back to talking in Italian. And then someone, not an Italian, from an African country, he says something and everyone laughs, ha ha ha, and they're kind of glancing at me. And there was a Filipino among the clerics, and he wanted to talk to me about something else. Also related to safeguarding, but something else, you know. So he pulls me aside, hey, I need your advice on this, etc., what can I do? Okay. So I give him the advice, and I asked him, so what did they say? I understood a little bit of it. He said, well, promise you're not going to do anything stupid. Okay, I promise I'm not going to do anything stupid. And the guy's joke was, you're just a visitor here. Why should we listen to you? And since then, so there are a lot of good people. Well, I don't know if there are a lot, but I've met good people who don't act that way in the Curia, in the Vatican. But I've also met people who do act that way. And sadly, these are people, they're not at the ones I've met are not at the very top, but they have a lot of authority. And some of them have authority over what happens in the formation of our priests. That's the culture. In 2015 or 2016, Pope Francis, you know, he floated the idea of making a female, and I think it was a female religious, I'm not sure from where, European, continental Europe, either German or no, I can't remember, making her a cardinal. And there is precedent. There have been female cardinals. There's no rule against that. In fact, the Pope can make anyone he wants to a cardinal. I don't even know if there's a condition, are there canon lawyers here? If the person even has to be Catholic. Probably does. But, and so he's floating the idea, and so the women on the commission were, oh great, this is going to be great if it happens, you know, and I hope she works with a commission. Someone with the internal rank and authority of a cardinal. So here's the thing, and this is what we experienced on the commission as well. Insight into how the Vatican works, at least currently, and as Helen here, if maybe the Pope had an army, it would be different, but the Popes they no longer have their personal army whom they can send after people to pull them in line. So there's an idea, the Pope has an idea, he floats it across the different departments, gets feedback. And what I've observed so far is, and I'm thinking maybe the Pope, you know, he's choosing which battles to fight. But so the idea is floated, and when there's a lot of pushback, it looks like people will, quote unquote, rebel, not an armed rebellion, but you know, they'll just ignore him or stop, you know, following, doing what he asks them to do. He kind of shelves the idea. So there was a lot of pushback against this idea of having a female cardinal. And that was a shock to me, because I was baptized when I was 2 years old. And I was raised in Catholic schools run by Jesuits. My dad went to a Jesuit school. His brothers went to a Jesuit school, you know, so it's this very Catholic upbringing. And I realized there are a lot of things I assume to be self-evident to everyone, which are not. It's all in my Catholic bubble. And even within the church, there are things that I learned in school, at least that's how what I absorbed, right, through my own lens of interpretation, as a child all the way through university. One was, if the Pope says something, everyone has to obey. You know, he says jump, yes, how high? Tells you to jump off a cliff, you jump off a cliff. You have to trust him and obey. Come to find out that's not true. Most leadership in the church, when something comes from the Vatican, and it's also a function of how close or how far away the country is where the church is located from the Vatican, the response is, oh, that's just a suggestion, and Rome is very far away. These are highly educated people with multiple degrees. I don't know if they actually have a prayer life. That was one of my personal questions. Now, for the Catholic stuff to work, a person has to have a prayer life. And I'll explain what I mean in a bit. So another thing I've come to realize is the church for a long time has operated without the means to enforce accountability from within. Ever since the Pope lost his armies. And even then, you know, whether the armies were used in a good way or a bad way depended on who was in charge. And I was thinking, wow, this is, you know, maybe that's from a more, academic standpoint. Maybe like something about human, how can, what got me thinking about this? At the beginning, in the first 3 years, we were all fired up, including the victims, Mary Collins, Peter Saunders, and we gave so many talks. You know, because part of everyone wanted to do their job well, to help this man change things, the Pope. Easily in 2 years, we were 16 in the beginning, between the 16 of us, we gave more than 1,000 talks, workshops, seminars all over the world. And the assumption at the time was, well, okay, these are educated people, they probably have goodwill, because, you know, that's how they reached the position they reached. Because positions of authority in the church are theoretically supposed to be positions of service. The model is the washing of the feet in the Gospels, if you're familiar with that. Jesus says, if anyone wants to come after me, he tells Peter, if you want to be with me, you have to let me wash your feet. Because Apostle Peter was saying, no, don't do that, you shouldn't. You know, you're the Lord, you're the Messiah, don't do that. Treating him like he was some kind of royalty, right? And Jesus said, no, if you don't let me do this, you'll have no part of me. If you want to be a leader, this is what you do. Some are really like that. And they have a strong prayer life. The others, they're not like that. And because I don't develop a relationship with them, I don't know if they have a prayer life or not, or who they pray to. Okay? So, why do I say prayer life? Because in terms of change from within, without any established accountability system that's not only accepted, but it's valued and working well and enforceable, change from within depends on personal internal motivation. And for a Catholic, that means basically the idea is, okay, this guy or lady follows what they believe Jesus wants them to do. Right? And Jesus never abused his, if you think about his apostles, Peter, who else? Nathaniel, all those people. You could think that these were the people he formed, he was their formator. He never abused his position and had sex with them. Now, I'm not going to put it bluntly. He never did. Okay, float that idea to a crowd of people who are professional church members. Some understand it, usually the women better than the men. Others close off and tune out. So things that we thought were going to be a no-brainer because we're dealing with presumably people of goodwill who are highly educated and can understand complex concepts, the information fell on deaf ears. So I was thinking, is this a problem of the information? Some people say, oh, because that's from a Western country, the culture is different, blah, blah. So no, we're talking about principles here, don't you? Nothing. Okay, very few. In fact, the annual report, it was the first or second annual report of the Commission to the Pope, was that at best only about 20% of the church globally is actually trying to start implementing a safe environment system. Now the numbers in the Philippines, the proportion kind of matches. Now, right now we're at about 20%, which I would say is actually not bad because at the beginning we were at zero. We were at zero at the beginning. At least now there's 20% trying. Okay. Okay, so fell on deaf ears. How do you think? So what's the problem here? How come they can't just take this information and run with it? So and they were saying, oh, because it's from the U.S. So I asked my kids to read the stuff we were sharing. So a lot of them is pulled from the website, from Child Hope, from Save the Children. I said, okay, read this. So they asked about the technical terms. What does this mean? What does that mean? Okay. So what do you get out of this? What's the main point? We have to protect children. Okay. What about what it says about talking to the police? Oh, yeah, it has to be reported. The younger ones because it's a bad thing. The older ones because it's a crime. My kids got it. Okay. Now, so I started looking at academics who had studied culture change, because there's this thing about culture. And it's going back, where you have an organization, an institution, that has a lot of assumed privilege, trust, and power, like the church, like in the past militaries. In the developed countries, that's getting better. Although, for example, in the United States, the largest numbers of proportion of PTSD among female members and veterans is not from exposure to combat. It's from being raped by servicemen. Despite all the protections that have been put in place, and the difference, I think, between a country that works like the US and a country like the Philippines, where it's kind of really up to who you know, how much power you have, how much money you have, how much influence you have, and who you know personally. At least in the US, at some point they have recourse to the system of justice. There's going to be a judge somewhere and a prosecutor somewhere that's going to do his or her job. Now, where the church operates in most of the world, that way of valuing and implementing justice doesn't exist because the people have a greater value, or at least seem to, in my view. They value their own personal needs and priorities above the principle of justice and justice for all. So, for example, and that operates in the church as well. So when you have a group where people are given, without really earning it, from the one they're in a relationship. By earn, I mean, if I become friends with someone, try to become friends with you, you're not going to trust me right away. You're going to check me out, right? Yeah, I have to go through my paces and to meet your criteria of, okay, this person's trustworthy. Our priests and bishops don't have to do that with the laity because they're sense of esteem, self-concept, self-image, group identity, even use of resources especially, is all tied up into that system. The only way to change it is to get people from the outside, which is what the Pope has been doing. He's been getting a lot of people who are not from continental Europe to work in the Vatican. And those decisions have been very unpopular. Another thing I learned was, this Pope, more than any other Pope, at least going back to John the 23rd, well, all the popes have received death threats. The majority for this Pope has been from death threats from within the Catholic Church, not from outside. John Paul II, Paul VI, John the, they all got their death threats from outside. So what does that tell me as someone who's an observer, who I have trouble being academically objective? Because I experience a lot of goodness in the church also, from individual people. How do I say this? There are people who, maybe when they joined up, they signed up, they had good intentions, were on the right track, but under this system it's been warped, and now they value, and I would say from this psychological standpoint, they value themselves more than what they committed to. And by self, I mean what their priorities are, you know, how they see the world. Okay. So how do you change that? So I looked at, okay, are there any academics? Because that's what I mean by culture, right? And in this culture also, it's supported by a lot of other people, society or sub-society, because there's no accountability system. And when you have organizations that are like that, they have a lot of power that's given to them by their quote-unquote subjects or citizenry, and there's no external accountability, that power gets abused. An example, current example, are police states, where if you go against it, you get killed, nothing, and no one can do anything. You know, think about Tiananmen Square, university students in China protesting, calling for freedom, etc., etc. Government didn't like it, they shot them. You know, what's been happening in the Middle East. Think of in Asia, Southeast Asia, in Africa, Idi Amin. He got away with murdering lots of people when he was in charge. There's no accountability. In Laos, Cambodia, Pol Pot, you know, murdered so many people. Think of Hitler, right? The only way to get him to stop were external forces applying force to stop. So, this guy, his name is Professor Nathan Nunn, economist at Harvard. He also dabbles in anthropology and sociology. He was able to come up with, based on historical data, an empirical model that answers the question, what makes a culture change? Okay, and he found that so for simplicity, he divided his hypotheses into two areas: internal sources of change and external sources of change. And what are the weights of each in terms of spurring that change? By far, through history, across countries, external sources of change are what spurred cultural change within a particular society. Nowadays, that comes in the form of media exposure, media coverage, okay, and government intervention, whether it's the government in one's own country or other governments. And change from within is very, very difficult, and usually takes 3 generations. So in the US, they count generations in 35-year brackets. I think in the UK, it's 25-year brackets, if I'm not mistaken. So 35-year brackets, that's 100 years. In either case, What's needed is for some kind of shock to the system, which is more, the shocks that come from an external source seem to work better than shocks coming from within. A shock to the system that causes the incoming generation to question how the older generation has been doing things. Why? Because the older way of doing things doesn't work for them and their needs. Not only, if you think of human survival, it's not just in terms of physical needs. Because we have social needs, identity needs that are part of our sense of survival as a human being. Can I continue to remain human in these conditions? Can I flourish as a human being in these conditions? Can I grow in dignity? So if we look at, I use this idea, his idea, and he even has an algorithm, he has a formula for it so you can make predictions. But you'll have to ask an economist to help you understand that. or someone who's good at statistics and stuff like that. So looking at the church, what's happened, right? What are the countries areas in the world where the churches that change has actually occurred? United States, Australia, Ireland, now the UK now. They're kind of still in their process. Germany, yeah.
New Zealand?
New Zealand, yes. There still are problems though, but generally a lot better than before, right? Yeah. Oh, France. Yeah, so France, Spain, Poland are, at least they got their research done. And they had independent groups do the research, right? And they published it. Okay, but these are countries where Portugal also has their published research published. Independent group did the research. But Spain, Portugal, France, Poland, my thinking is these are countries where relationships still count a lot more than the value of the force of law and justice for all. Now, Philippines was colonized by Spain for 500 years. My understanding of the history of the Philippines before they came in different regions, people were organized by tribal governments. And we actually they had their own systems of governance and justice. And they actually seemed to be working very well. And they actually valued justice through the rule of law, whatever their norms were. And they implemented them. After 500 years of being under the Spanish, it's like who you know, how much money you have, what resources you have, what you bring to it. And the law, even in this country right now, and this is most Southeast Asian countries, East Asia, in South Asia, I can't speak for South Asia, I'm not familiar with their cultures and how people interact with the law. East Asia, more familiar, East Asia would be China, Korea, Japan, Taiwan. Southeast Asia is Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, Singapore. So Singapore is a little different. But in Southeast Asia, people follow the law until they need to do something, or they need something that the law can't help out with. And that needing something could be needing justice to get done, or needing to be protected from undergoing whatever is in the law to implement justice. So cover up, denial, everything. And people make use of existing laws here to do that. So for example, in the Philippine Congress, when I was in college, late 80s, early 1990s, one of our congressmen was found guilty of and convicted of pedophilia, okay? And he ended up in jail because of that. The reason he was convicted was he didn't pay off. He didn't pay enough money. Yes, he didn't pay enough. Plus, international media had really blasted the stories all over the place. Local media could not avoid reporting it. Now, he's in jail. We have no law against a convicted felon continuing to serve in government. We don't. Elected officials can actually, a convicted felon can run for office, elected office, from jail and win. In this case, he continued functioning as a congressman in jail, and he was re-elected in jail. And he had this group of people, and some of them are still there, and some are, so now it's, we also have these political dynasties. It's our culture where the children, nephews, nieces, inherit the political position, especially in Congress and the Senate. Okay, so, and there's still a group, not as big as before, but still, who've been trying to lower the age of consent to 9. To 9. And they're still there in office. Now, of course, at least there are enough other people who reject that. But there was a time when Halos was not yet arrested, still in office, where it was gaining traction. Because this is a very rich guy, has a lot of money, also has a lot of information on the dirt in other politicians' lives. Okay, so what I've observed from other countries in Southeast Asia, that's kind of how, except for, I don't know about Singapore, that's kind of how the law is treated. In China, I had early on a few religious orders operating there, and even one of the bishops who was publicly known, recognized by the state as well. So this was about 2015, 2016. Now they want to implement church norms. Said, okay, well, you're going to need help from the government as well, the police, because this is a criminal, a guy performing criminal behavior. You want to get him off the streets so he doesn't continue to offend, and you need the government for that. So he goes to the state ministry for religion, talks to the person there, and the person in charge of the state ministry, even though they have laws against this, he said, okay, he questions the provincial about whether the person has said anything against the Communist Party or done anything against the Communist Party. And I said, well, no, but this is bad for Chinese society. Well, you guys take care of that. So, that's my experience, right? So what's my whole point? We need the media, we need exposure. Just like with any other organization, the leader and leaders need to be strong-willed and be able to create, not be afraid to use their whatever powers they have to create this environment of psychological safety, beginning with the man at the top and the people under him who are supposed to help them. And I've seen this, including in governments. And the UN also, UNICEF, in conjunction with Plan International, has studied how child protection systems work or don't work in developing countries. It's been about 25 years now, ongoing study. Southeast Asia, Africa, South America. And what they found was, even in countries which appear to be approaching or already compliant with the UN national framework for child protection in terms of what's written on paper. So this is a secular world, not churches. enforcement depends on who's in charge at the time. So I live nearby. Here we're organized, our townships are called barangays, barangay. And we have a barangay chairman. He's like the town councilman in Western countries. And this is the smallest local government unit that exists. That's where everything begins in the township. And this chairman has councilors under him, and some of the councilors, together with people from the community, now form it's called Barangay Child Protection Council. What the UN found was this works well only if the person in charge and the chairman have their minds and hearts in the right place and take it seriously. Yeah. So, when I was new on the commission, so here in the Philippines, if you notice, we have people who drive us around. We employ drivers. Okay, so our driver approached me and said, their neighbor, they found out that their neighbor's child was being sexually abused by an uncle. They all live in the same shack in a poor area. So he's asking, what do I do? I said, oh, you reported to the Barangay Child Protection Council. And he said, well, they don't want to do that. The family, the mother, didn't want to do that because they were afraid that it would be gossiped about. So, I assured them, no, under the law, they're supposed to handle this confidentially and protect the anonymity of the complainant, etc., etc. They're trained in this. If you read their guidelines and training protocol, it's very good. So they went, and finally he's convinced them. He brings them. They report it in the morning. By afternoon, the whole barangay knows about it. Yeah. So, and the one in charge at the time, he's no longer the one in charge of the barangay. He's no longer the head of the town, the chairman. He said, well, that's what they get for reporting it. This should be a family matter. Okay, so back to my question. What motivates human behavior? In each country where the church is, I think that's what we need to find out. And that's what needs to get activated. That's where you need to we need to set our laser sights on. In the Philippines, unfortunately, in a lot of Southeast Asian countries, the moral compass is determined by what causes embarrassment versus what doesn't, keeping or losing face. Our moral compass is not governed by what's written in the law. You just look at how our motorcycle drivers drive. Lines on the road are just guidelines. We don't have to follow them. The enforcers see people, motorcycle drivers, violating traffic laws, and they let them go. They see someone who looks like, except for an accident, right? Who violates traffic laws, crosses a red light. Notice what types of cars they stop. The newer ones, the more expensive ones. Why? Because it's a practice to take a bribe here. So, now a question that I have in relation to, I think, what Kieran, if I understood correctly. So how can we also get people to understand and make use of the law as it's supposed to be used? So from my standpoint of, okay, how do you motivating people? How do you get people, motivated to do it? And currently, I'm telling you, in the churches, regardless of the cost, there is a bishop here. I'll provide you with the information because it was made public. we do have one bishop who sent someone to jail. And-
child sexual abuse.
Yes. And he published the information in the parishes in the parish newsletter, and he went around telling everyone about it. Okay? But it was confined just to his diocese. Even other bishops don't know. Why? Because that's the Filipino way. Okay? But the man is, unfortunately, in terms of our law, so this guy had multiple child victims, but his sentence term was only like 5 years or something like that. So he has 2 more years to go.
Is he in our database too?
No, not yet. He's not there. He's not there. But because it was published in their websites, and I've been trying to look for because I saw it. It was even on their Facebook page. You know, once I get that, I'll give it to you. Then you can.
What year?
During the pandemic. The complaints came shortly before, and the man was convicted, dismissed from the clerical state, convicted in the criminal court, secular, I think maybe 2021 or 2022.
So
So-
we're just saying no one's been convicted, that's wrong.
Well, yeah, because they hid the information, right? So, you know, they need to learn about transparent communication, when to do it, how to do it. You know, so at least he told his diocese. None of the broadsheets here, the major news outlets that picked it up. Now, why is that?